Project 1. Project 1 is the first major writing project for the course, and it's due in about 3 weeks on Monday, September 23rd. In this video, I want to explain the purpose and the process for the assignment so you know how to get started. So let's take a quick moment before we do that to review what we have covered so far in the course. So in week 1, we looked at where we are right now with the help of Steven Johnson and Nicholas Carr, and you wrote your own literacy self-portraits. As you are all well aware, we are in the middle of a major shift in the tools and technologies of writing, reading, and communication. After 500 years of print culture, with printed books at the center of the information ecosystem, we are now in a period of change and upheaval. Mobile and digital technologies have exploded in the last decade, and new forms of reading and writing technologies are evolving rapidly. Johnson and Carr, as you all observed in Assignment 1, take almost opposing views on the significance of this shift. Carr focuses on the argument that we may be losing the ability to focus on long-form texts, while Johnson argues that we are more connected and smarter as a result. Many of you wrote about sharing some of Carr's worries, while also embracing some of Johnson's optimism. Then in week 2, we started our study of the history of the book and the making of print culture. As Nicole Howard makes clear in her book, The Life Story of a Technology, books have a very long history. Even if we count only those that have been printed by mechanical printing presses, books have been around for over 500 years. If we include ancestral book forms like scrolls and scribal texts and tablets and all that stuff, written texts go back at least 3,500 years. The modern world as we know it has grown up around books. As Howard writes, books are a kind of enabling technology that makes other developments possible. Other developments like science, for example, and Renaissance humanism. So now Project 1 asks you to take a detailed look at one specific event or one specific moment in the history of books during the print era. So for our purposes, the print era means roughly 1450 to 1980. Now, before you get started on Project 1, I want to show you a few things on the course website. So I'm on the course website for the technology of the book. This is the week 3 page, and you'll see right here, getting started with the case study project, there are 4 links. The first one is the Project 1 template itself that looks like this. So please read through this carefully and make sure you understand what the assignment is. Just a few highlights here is that it's called a case study, and it should be about 1,000 to 1,200 words in length, which is about 4-5 pages max, double spaced, formatted according to MLA style. All of the samples are done correctly. And your works cited list should include at least 3 scholarly sources. We'll talk more next week about how to find those sources. You can use the course textbooks, and I think you should, as sources, but you should also find 3 scholarly journal articles related to your topic for the practice of finding the articles and for, more importantly, analyzing and synthesizing the research that you do on those. So that's kind of the parameters of the project, 1,000 to 1,200 words. We're going to do it in 3 weeks. So week 1, which is really where we are now, week 1 of the project, which is actually week 3 of the course. Preliminary topic ideas and research questions due Monday, September 9th. Week 2 of this project is a working bibliography of 3 or more sources, which is due September 16th. And then week 3 is a writing week during which you will complete a draft of your Project 1 case study, which is due September 23rd. So as it says here, your purpose in the case study is to describe a key event or person or technology in the history of print culture, analyze it using one or more of the key concepts in the course, and those key concepts are technology, commerce, culture, reading and literacy, and writing and authorship, and then to explain the importance of the event for our understanding of print culture. I'll leave some of the details for you to read, but remember that structure: describe, analyze, explain, because what you will find is that you probably want to follow that as an outline. You can think of your case study in 3 parts. Part 1 is to describe, where you kind of tell the story. What is it that you're writing about? Give the background, explain it to your readers. The middle section, probably the longest section of the paper, is analyze. This is the body of your paper, where you're analyzing the topic using one or more of the key concepts from the course. And remember, to analyze something means to break it down into parts and show how it works. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that later on. But the analysis piece is really the body of the paper, where you're looking at and questioning, parts of something and why it's significant. And then the conclusion of your paper is the explain part. Explain why this event is important. Think of that as the so what part. Okay, Gutenberg invented the printing press. Here's how it adapted and improved on previous technologies. So what? Why was this important to the longer story of the making of print culture and the making of the modern world? You will see in a moment that the three examples that I posted pretty much follow this structure more or less rigidly. And then the criteria for success at the end shows how this will be evaluated, and that corresponds directly to the rubric in Blackboard, because we try to be very organized. So this is kind of what you'll be evaluated on, the criteria. So that's the Project 1 case study assignment itself. So start there, read through that, make sure you understand the assignment. And then to really help you get a handle on this, I've provided 3 examples. So sample 1 is a case study that I wrote myself as a kind of demo. And it's about the Licensing Act of 1662. And it's often cited as one of the very first versions of copyright law. So the purpose of my case study is to explain what the Licensing Act was and to reflect on what its significance might be as a kind of precursor to modern concepts of copyright and authorship. So you can read through this as an example. You can see how it's formatted. It's how long it is. It's really 4 pages and a little bit over. There's the works cited page. And hopefully that's a reasonably good example of what a case study might look like. To give you another example, case study 2 is written by a student named Jacqueline Carroll, and she gave me permission to share it with other students in the class. She wrote this 2 years ago, and it's on women's letter writing and its effect on print culture. Now, Jacqueline was interested in letter writing because letter writing is often considered women's writing, in quotation marks, and sometimes considered to therefore be inferior to books, right? Men write books and women write these letters. But as Jacqueline goes on to argue in her case study, kind of taking a feminist point, she argues, quote, "For these early modern women, letter writing granted them access to education, improved their social standing, and opened spaces where they could be readers and, more importantly, authors." That's kind of her thesis. So again, you can see her format. She uses the centered headings on the page to sort of break the paper into chunks, and then comes to her conclusion at the end here. And it's a really nice example, good sources, and a really interesting kind of topic. And then the third example, sample case study 3, is by student Eric Yarberry. And Eric wrote about newspapers and their influence on American history. He begins, his description section here, begins with a dramatic account of a raid by colonial Boston police on a newspaper office in Boston in the year 1690. So reading through Eric's case study on the influence of newspapers on American political rhetoric and political culture, I think we can't help but hear echoes of some of today's debates about, quote, fake news and the role of the free press. So in some cases, this is not just history. This is still a debate that is quite alive and well. So if you read Eric's case study, and if you read all 3 of the case studies carefully, you'll see that they follow roughly the same structure. All of them include headings to identify key sections, and sample 3 even uses those exact headings that correspond to the outline suggested in the template, which is description, analysis, and explanation. So they usually follow that pattern. You introduce a topic, then you describe it in more detail, tell about why it's important, then you drill down and analyze in detail some particular element of it that's interesting to you, and then you kind of pull back at the end and explain the significance and the so what, and draw some conclusions about, why is this an interesting episode in the history of print culture. So with those as examples, and hopefully you're beginning, as you read through these, you're beginning to get a sense of what this kind of case study thing is all about. So how do you find a good topic? You're only 2 weeks into the course. We haven't read a lot of readings yet. So where do you even start? Well, there's a shortcut that I would suggest, and I've suggested it in multiple places. Both the Nicole Howard book and the Broadview Introduction to Book History include these timelines. Timeline is just basically a chronological list of key events. You can read through that timeline and just see what jumps out at you. And I guarantee pretty much any topic that's listed in one of those timelines will make a good case study topic. It will probably, if it's on that timeline, it's probably pretty significant because these people that study history thought it was significant enough to include in their timeline. And that also means you'll probably be able to find some good scholarly sources about it. So start kind of flipping through those two timelines. They're different. They include different things. And see what jumps out at you. Now I'm going to try one example here to show you how I would do assignment number 3. You remember assignment number 3 is about generating research questions. So I went through just now and picked out a date kind of somewhat at random. I picked the date 1833. This is listed in the Broadview Introduction to Book History text. The year 1833, the daguerreotype, the earliest photographic process, is invented by Louis-Jacques Daguerre. That's basically all it tells us. So my imagination was piqued a little bit, and I thought, well, this could be pretty interesting as a topic, because maybe it's the first. They call it the earliest photographic process. So my brain starts thinking, well, maybe this is the beginning of the use of photographs in books, right? Being able to reproduce photographs and print them would, as images, would add a lot to books, right? So prior to now, there had been no photographs in books because there hadn't been any process for making photographs. So what I'm going to do is show you how I would use the 5 frameworks or the 5 key concepts. There's another video posted that kind of walks through those, but I think you'll figure it out pretty quickly. I'm going to take each one in turn. So we start with technology. Technology is our key lens. So if you think about the daguerreotype 1833 in terms of technology, what kind of questions would you ask? Well, I came up with these. So technology. What is the process that Daguerre invented? How did it work? Technically, what is a daguerreotype? What is this earliest photographic process? How did he make photographs in 1833? What did it do that was different from other forms of visuals and illustrations that existed prior to 1833? And then a kind of further question was, when did publishers start using this process to print photos? Was it 100 years later? Was it the next week? I mean, how fast was this technology picked up and adopted in the making of books and other printed publications? So if you're thinking in terms of technology, those are the kinds of questions you might ask. Well, our second framework then is culture. Culture is all about society, people, right? So if you're thinking in terms of culture, you might generate questions like these. How did people respond to these new photos? Were photos widely used in printed books? What kinds of books included photos at first? Was there a debate about the use of images? Were any of those photos seen as controversial? When did photo-heavy magazines begin to appear? Right, you've all seen magazines that are almost entirely photos and not very much text. When did that happen? 1835, 1900? I mean, how long did it take before photographs became a sort of dominant medium in the genre of magazines? So those are the kinds of questions I might generate if I was thinking about culture. Now, commerce, of course, is all about economics and business and money. So if we're thinking in terms of commerce about the daguerreotype and its invention in 1833, we might ask these questions. Did photography grow quickly as a profession? How long was it before photographers started being employed by publishers? Were they more common in some types of publications than others? How were photographers compensated? Right? Did suddenly newspapers say, oh, we need to hire a bunch of photographers? Did photographers work freelance? I mean, kind of thinking professionally about how photography got woven into the process of printing and publishing. I mean, there's probably some pretty interesting stories about the early people, the pioneers of photography, and how they used this early daguerreotype technology to influence the business of printing and publishing. So that's where you might go with commerce. Now, if you think about reading, obviously we're thinking about reading, readers, and literacy. So here's a question. Was the daguerreotype the beginning of visual literacy? How did readers adjust to the appearance of photos in books and other publications? Were photos perceived as an enhancement of the reading experience? And kind of interesting to think about, what did these readers think? The books have not had photographs in them, and then at some point, this guy invents a technique that can do it, and people see photos. And what did they think about that? How did that change their views of reading? Did they like the photographs? Did it bring new people in? Did it bring a new form of visual literacy? Those are the kinds of questions you would ask about reading. And then last but not least, our fifth and final sort of frame of reference or key concept is the notion of authors and authorship and writing. So if you're thinking along those lines, you might ask questions like this. Did authors begin asking for photos to be included in their books? Did authors work with the photographers? Did they work in tandem? Did they write alongside the images? How was the writing process itself affected by the use of photos? When you think about websites today, right? Their websites are inherently multimodal. They include images, they include words, and it's very much a multimodal process. Did that start in the 1830s with the daguerreotype? How did that evolve? So how did the authors begin to work with photographers, and what did authors think about this new technology of the photograph? So you can see that took me about 15 minutes to just riff on all 5 of those frameworks. So you can see how I used the 5 key concepts to begin to generate a list of preliminary questions. Now, you probably wouldn't want to try to address all of these in one case study, and some of them are probably more interesting than more fruitful than others. So you might decide that one group of questions seems like something you want to develop further. But I think it's worth kind of running through this heuristic or this rubric first to just riff on technology, culture, commerce, reading, and authorship, and see where they lead you and what kinds of questions you come up with. You might end up deciding you just want to focus on one piece, like the culture piece, or maybe you're interested in the notion of visual literacy, so you focus on the reading piece. That's up to you. But the idea is to generate, interesting questions that will guide you in your research project and lead you to some interesting answers in your case study. So once you have that initial set of questions around your topic, you're well on your way to your case study. The next step is to post it in the Assignment 3 forum on Blackboard and get some feedback from your peers. That feedback from other readers in the class will help you to define your focus and narrow your questions and narrow your topic in some interesting ways. At that point, you're ready to move on to searching for sources that might begin to answer some of your questions. So I hope this video kind of gives you a snapshot and helps you get started generating ideas and research questions for Project 1. Thanks for listening.